everybody. Welcome to Vietnam Rising podcast, where we share with you about great entrepreneur stories in Vietnam. Today, we will discover a topic that is often overlooked, hiring people with disability in your workforce, or how is the HR scenes in Vietnam in general. 7% of Vietnam's populations are people with certain types of disabilities. They are often mistaken for inabilities, but there are employers and companies who could prove otherwise. People with disability are as capable as anyone doing highly expertise jobs. Today, we're going to share an inspiring story from a company that employs computing experts with disabilities. Joining with me today is the CEO, founder of Enablecode, Colin Blackwell. Colin and Enablecode has made the name to the World Bank Global Impact Portfolio, a group of 40 diverse and high potential youth employment projects around the world. He is also the chairman of Vietnam Business Forum HR Group and the founder of Vietnam HR Association. Hello, Colin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. All right, welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. Would you like to introduce about yourself more to the audience?
Certainly, yes. So I came to Vietnam a very long time ago. I often get asked by young people here in Vietnam how long I've been in Vietnam, and my usual reply is longer than them. So I was first here in 1995.
Wow.
And I was basically the first person here in human resources. So I was with PwC back then.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the early things I did, apart from setting up the first employment agency, salary surveys, and things like that in Vietnam, was I also founded the Human Resource Club of Vietnam. It started as just the first HR managers all coming to my office every 2 weeks. And now that's a much bigger organization. I sometimes go to their conferences and I see, like 1,000 people in the room. And I always smile to myself, just thinking, what it was. It was just like 10 people when I first started it. So yes, I have a very long history of HR here in Vietnam. I was here 5 years the first time, and then I was back in Europe for a while, where I was running global HR functions for big multinational companies. But then about 10 years ago, I decided to come back to Vietnam. Vietnam always has a certain appeal. I think a lot of people do come back here, and I made the right decision to do that. So I had climbed the corporate ladder, as it were, and wanted to do something a little bit with my own business, and especially to give back a little bit to society and do something for the general good.
I see. Is that why you started Enablecode?
Yes, certainly. The idea for Enablecode came up actually with my original World Bank work with the Vietnam Business Forum. So that's all of the chambers of commerce like AmCham, EuroCham, the Japanese, Koreans together. And we're one voice to the government, giving our recommendations from the private sector to national policy. But that involves quite a lot of the planning with the World Bank and understanding their view of how economies develop. And in Vietnam, when I first arrived here, there was 60% poverty. So, things, you could see they had potential, but most people were poor. Now, poverty has been eliminated in Vietnam. But as Vietnam became a middle-income country last year, one thing that the World Bank was saying was that you then have to target assistance to people who've been left behind as poverty was eliminated. And I was thinking about that and looking at who was the biggest group of people who'd been left behind, and it is people with disabilities. So the disability incidence rate in Vietnam is one of the highest in the world. So it's difficult to get the exact number, but there's probably about 8 million people with disabilities in Vietnam, and the employment rate for them is quite low, which results in poverty and exclusion. So whilst there's some great charities obviously giving very necessary assistance to them, what is really needed is that they're sustainable, that they can have their own jobs where possible.
I see. And what are the works that your staff's doing at Enablecode? This is a software company, right?
Yes. So in other countries, let's say in England or America, the very typical work that someone with a physical disability does is software. Because if you think about it, if you've got a physical disability, physical labor is the most inappropriate thing. So, you know, if the job involves physical strength or working with your hands and you've got a physical disability, you're not going to, you know, do very well at that work typically. Unfortunately, a lot of the work creation in Vietnam for people with disabilities is at the very low end of the market, which is typically physical labor. But what I wanted to do was to prove that this could also work in Vietnam, where these high-skilled technology jobs could also create opportunity for Vietnamese with disabilities. And that's one thing I learned quite early on, actually, with the Vietnam Business Forum, is you can't simply say something like, oh, in England we do it this way, because that's not a good comparison. It's a very different country. So I have a theory that it would work in Vietnam as well, but I have to prove it. You know, people are very pragmatic here, very practical. So us Westerners are very often accused, quite rightly, of being, you know, idealistic and theoretical, saying, you know, sort of, we think this will be okay. Whereas in this part of the world, people say, well, prove it, which is perfectly reasonable. So Enablecode really was a pilot project to prove that Vietnamese with disabilities could do this high-skill work. And it's a massive challenge because where you have millions of people who aren't included in the workforce, if the solution was simple, it would have been fixed years ago. So it's taking on a particularly difficult challenge. But if anyone's going to take this on, and it's a mixture of technology and human resources, but mainly a human resources challenge. So in my view, this was probably the most difficult human resource challenge imaginable in Vietnam. And as, I suppose, the original HR person here in Vietnam, I'd have a better chance of maybe solving it than other people would. So in a way, it's my responsibility to help those others if I can solve that problem.
What is the specific HR challenge that you face when you create Enablecode? I'm assuming it's the mindset, the training that you have to put into to invest to those talents, right?
Yes, so a lot of it is around mindset. So this comes down a little bit to Vietnamese culture as well. So in Vietnam, people are very caring, they're very friendly and family orientated, which is great in so many ways. But when it comes to helping a disabled person, they'll automatically assume that person is a dependent. They need your help. So the good thing to do is help them. So for example, before when I'd go down the street with, you know, a colleague who's in a wheelchair and we come across some steps, you could just ask anyone in Vietnam to help you lift the wheelchair up. You couldn't do that in England. So that's the good side of them caring and helping like that. But also the downside of that is that they'd overprotect. So they would say a disabled person needs our support and protection. So you wouldn't send them to school because that would be unfair. Because they wouldn't be able to get a job anyway, because you have to look after them. And then that becomes a little bit self-fulfilling because the person hasn't gone to school, they can't get a job, and because they don't have a job, you say, hey, look, therefore disabled people can't get work. So to break out of a cultural cycle, it can only be done positively. And like I said, the way to do that in Vietnam is to prove that's possible. So get a few success stories and publicize that, and then other people can follow it. And what it does create is an economic reason to do something. That's another part of the very pragmatic nature of Vietnamese. If there's an economic reason to do something, they'll do it. So if, for example, a family has a child with a disability and they've kind of given up on the hope of, you know, that child being able to look after themselves, but then they see an example of a person with a disability actually earning good money, they'd be like, oh, okay, that is something useful.
Yeah.
Should go to school. There is hope, and encourage them that way. And of course, something like a cultural shift, this is generational. This can't be solved in 5 minutes, but you have to start somewhere. And Enablecode was my attempt just to try and start it. And, again, a solution for something like this can't be achieved immediately. And this is why we have this World Bank group. We have in other parts of the world, in Africa and South America and India and many places, companies trying to do similar kinds of things and all slightly different approaches. But all of us is very difficult because you're trying to meet a social objective and a business objective at the same time. So we all agree to share information under the World Bank. So we have these regular global conference calls, or I go over there for meetings as well, and we'll just share experiences. So I was over in America earlier this year, before the flight travel ban, and I met someone from Kenya there, and her company had done almost exactly the same as I'd done here in Vietnam, and learned exactly the same lesson. And I said to her, sort of, if we'd met 2-3 years ago, we would have saved each other a lot of time.
Yes.
But you have to go through this. And I'm getting, every time we try a different variation, we're getting a little bit closer. And also what's happening is the technology is changing. So if you're working in software, as you'd know as well, technology base is moving, which is a very big risk and threat for a lot of people, but also opportunity for others. So previously, if you wanted to get let's say a programmer job, it was very intensive how to learn it. It'd take you years, and you'd have to have the money, the mobility, the opportunity to go to university to study it. But now, there's a lot of the very modern programs like Python. You can learn it for free in the afternoon if you really want to. So this suddenly opens up the opportunity. So if there was a person who was disadvantaged or with a disability, and they really wanted to get ahead, they could suddenly jump ahead just as well as someone who spent years in university. So it levels the playing field quite a lot. But you've still got, the person could get the technical skills, but there's a lot of psychological. Us humans are a lot more complex than just having some technical skills. And one of the main challenges for people with disabilities is confidence. So if people have been trying to protect you all the time and trying to shield you from things, or assuming that you couldn't contribute, of course that's going to leave a psychological imprint on you. So then when you do get an opportunity, you're going to hesitate. It's like, can I really do this? So if you, very often in talking with a Vietnamese person with a disability, I'd see they had the capability to do something. I'd try and push them, say, come on, you can do this. Why don't you do that more difficult task? You'd get more money. And they would hesitate and say, no, just give them more time. They'll get to it at their own pace, but, they've got to build themselves up to it. So after a bit of experimentation and with the new technology available, what I've found is a very good starting point is this kind of business process outsourcing and machine learning. So these, basically what that is, it's what used to be data entry some years ago has now been replaced by artificial intelligence automation. So any routine task or, reading handwriting or something like that can mostly be done by an AI. But where the AI gets stuck, it needs purely human skills to kind of figure it out. And with that, we need people who are good at being people. It sounds funny, but it's these human skills, they're like often called common sense or something like that. And it's, in any country, it's not common. These kind of tasks that an AI can't do will take things like empathy, lateral thinking, problem solving, a bunch of these skills, which you don't learn typically in the education system. So again, it's an opportunity, it's a great leveler. And for a person with a disability in Vietnam, if they can get their head around that, there's quite a good career in it. So what we're doing at the moment is we go to a bunch of different charities here in Vietnam. And the charities, they're doing great work as it is. They have to, give the basic rehabilitation, feeding, medical assistance, shelter for people with disabilities, especially children, and the basic literacy and training. But while that's great, a disabled person would have many years ahead of them and need something sustainable, not just for income, but also purpose in life, to have a job to do, to be valued, and to be able to give back to society. So, of course, they want to do that as well, just like we do. And this kind of work is then a very good entry point for that. So the work is all done from home, which also is great for someone with disability. When we first started Enablecode, I came from a corporate background, and what you do in a corporate world is you all come into the office. I mean, of course you do.
Yes.
But then when I did that for some time with the staff, the people with disabilities, and in some ways it was good, it was quite social, but it's a real struggle for people to get into the office because, sometimes a 2-hour commute. And then, you've got to be helping, lifting people out the car into a wheelchair.
So the logistics is time consuming.
Yeah, but it's also, it's difficult for us, but it's even more difficult for them. And we started questioning, why are we dragging them into the office? And we started giving the option, do people want to work from home? And when we started giving the option, everyone wanted to work from home. Because if you have a mobility disability, it is difficult in so many ways to come into an office. And one of the examples, we work with one very nice charity called Maison Chance here in Ho Chi Minh City. And they had a number of different disability shelters here in the city, but they built a massive one out in Dak Nong, up in the Central Highlands, because it's a lot more cost effective to look after people there. And a number of the people who were working for us on projects moved up to Dak Nong, and they're still working for us from there. So as soon as people, are at the other end of a computer, it doesn't matter if they're down the road or in a different part of Vietnam or even a different country. So we were learning these kind of things as we went along as well. And the good thing with this kind of work as well is it's self-paced. So they get tested to see if they can do this kind of human thinking. And then they're working with an artificial intelligence, and the AI is giving them images or documents to process, and they get paid only for the number of actual successful work they do. So if they only want to work a little bit, or if they want to work whatever hours they want, this is flexible for them to do. It isn't like 9 to 5. So in so many ways, it's ideal kind of work. So the first time we tried Enablecode, we were trying full programming, which was maybe a little bit too ambitious, and the technology changed anyway. What we're doing with artificial intelligence is a much more reliable starting point, because as soon as someone has understood patience, persistence, results focus, lateral thinking, once they've got the foundation of that, they can do loads of other things in the future as well. But you have to start there.
That's really great. Then how do you keep your employees motivated in doing the jobs?
Yeah, that's one of the main challenges, and we're experimenting with that as well. So we've tried, mentoring people, explaining things to them. So one of the ones that you get unexpected challenges in this. So one of the early challenges we had was someone would come on to the system, they'd pass the test, they were capable of doing the work, but they'd do one day's work, and at the end of the day it says, okay, you're going to be paid this much. for that day's work. And they say, well, that's not very much money, and give up. And I'm like, well, wait a sec. You got to do, if you do 2 days work, then you get paid for 2 days or 3 days work, and it would add up. I mean, the good people can get $10 million, $20 million a month.
Yeah.
But people didn't understand that. So you've then got to experiment with how you're going to motivate or explain that. So I was trying to put it into context. So I'd say to them, for example, tell me about your other family members and what work they do. So one of them would say, my uncle's a rice farmer. And I'd say, well, if he only made 1 sack of rice a year, is that enough? No, he has to do thousands.
Yeah.
And then they'd say, oh yeah, my sister works in a coffee shop. And I'd say, well, if that coffee shop only made 1 cup of coffee a day, is that enough? No, they have to be selling it all day long. And maybe a brother works in a shop, if the shop sold 1 thing, would it be enough? So I say to them, I'm not asking you to do anything different from everybody else you know. You've got to stick at it and do work, and then you get paid. But and then I try and find different ways to explain the same thing, and experimenting with different things. Like the one I'm just trying to set up at the moment is using Zoom, because a lot of the people working for us, I've never met them, and they've never met each other. But how do you get a community or team spirit going?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing virtual office parties.
I have experienced that with I have seen multiple groups that doing that, and I think it's also a very good way to bond people, even though you can't see each other.
Yeah, because often Zoom is very much a one-way communication, or you have everybody on one panel. But the trick is that I did this with the Eurocham presentation recently, is if you set everybody to administrator and then do breakout rooms, people can literally move from one little group discussion to another and meet new people and have these little spontaneous chats with people that it's the kind of human interaction that people would want, especially if you're sitting at home all day working.
Yeah.
So I'll give that a try, see if that works. I was also within that, I was thinking of doing, maybe I could do prizes at every one of those parties for the best performer, and give them some grab food vouchers or something, So there are loads of, one thing of working with artificial intelligence, or what AIs have taught me, is we don't know all the answers, but you try things and see where the data leads you. So in doing something like this, it's something new that I can't copy someone else. And I just got to experiment with it, see what works.
That's awesome. So for the audience out there who also have hiring, people who wants to hire people with disabilities into their team, what is the ways that they can make them feel belong or accommodate into the company culture?
Yeah, I mean, I often get asked by companies to say, could they take on a few people with disabilities? And the first thing they think of is the physical environment, adaptive technology, and they'll measure the door and say, oh, a wheelchair could fit through here. But that's the least of the complication. It's actually, if you had just one disabled person come into your company, it's not just the physical surroundings, but it's also the psychological adaptation of that person and their colleagues. And it's not that easy. And what I found as well, of just bringing someone into the office, it's often difficult for them for a number of reasons. So having someone as a remote worker is actually better. When we're doing the work with the artificial intelligence, the work is being assigned by the AI, and their performance is being checked by algorithms. And the AI has no concept if they're disabled or not. It just knows how good their performance is. And that's an entirely fair and non-discriminatory system, which is perfect in that way. So to make an impact to create employment for a lot of people with disabilities, of course I would say this, is outsource work to someone like us, and then let it be our problem, because we can then be the experts in how to genuinely create employment there and adapt our own working systems to what makes them feel most comfortable. Because if the company just tries to do that for one person, it's possible, yes, of course, but it's quite difficult. And the HR department, for a start, would be asking, okay, what do we need to do? Yes, it can work, but it's going to be quite limited, the impact of that. Whereas something like what I'm doing, you're trying to get millions of people at the end of the day into work.
Yeah.
You need something really scalable. And also it has to be genuinely sustainable. So they have to be really doing work that has value. So a lot of time, there are companies who will take on people with disabilities, and they rely mostly still on charity as a business model, which is still doing something good. I mean, charities are still needed, but also new one of a social enterprise, which is genuinely self-sustaining. Also going to be then a genuinely more self-sustaining alternative for the person with a disability. Because often you're very young, and I say to them, look, you're going to be working for another 40 years. How are you going to look after yourself? And there's sometimes, unfortunately, with some people with disabilities, a dependency mindset, because they've been helped in the past. They're still hoping, and this is a very human thing to do, you'd hope that people would help you still in the future. So, for example, with you or me, we'd feel the same way. If someone had given us something for nothing before, and then you have to work for a living, you'd be like, well, I quite enjoyed getting that something for nothing before. Is that still on the menu? And a lot of the charities are children's charities, and of course you must help a child. But when a person with a disability is fully capable and an adult, then they should be able to help themselves and even other people. But it depends on the personality. I mean, there's just like the rest of us. There are so many different personalities, motivations. People are complex things,
So it's all about the mindsets for a person with disability to decide if they would rather to join a workforce and be as productive and as resourceful as anyone else, or they can choose different options out there. And then for enterprise, it's important for you to balance between helping and being a social enterprise, but also sustainable and staying profitable as well.
Yes. So this is also another challenge for social enterprises. So running a business is very difficult in the first place, to compete out there in the market and, make a profit and all these things. It's difficult at the best of times, as any startup will know.
Yes.
But if you put on top of that a social mission, it's more than double difficult.
Yes.
So a lot of social enterprises really, it's very difficult for them. But this is where I come up a little bit with a ecosystem model. So you don't try and reinvent the wheel. And if someone's already doing something well, you let them do it and leverage that into what you're trying to achieve. So the charities, they already do very good work. So I don't try and copy what they do or go into their territory. Then similar for, we've teamed up with a big software company, and they're very good at the software and building the AI. I don't have the resources to buy an AI and run it, but they're very good at doing it. So I don't need to, try and reinvent that. What I need to do is be the bridge between the charity and the software company. So the software company will do the work at quality for the client anyway. And at the end of the day, a client, they need a service. Yes, they appreciate your social mission, but if you can't deliver the quality, they can't help you.
Yes.
So when I'm teamed up with a very good quality software company, they can do this anyway. So the client doesn't have to worry about, the quality of the service, and they're happily signing contracts at 99.8%, 99.9% efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that.
Mm.
But as an option, we're putting in people with disabilities. So on the most recent project, we're putting in about 50 people, but there are 1,000 people in the software company. So it'll help those 50 people, but if for some reason they cannot do it, the work will get done anyway. So it's creating an opportunity. So you aren't risking the quality of the project. You're still being a capability-led business, which is important. So you get the business part right by leveraging someone who can do that. You get the social part right by having partners who are very good at doing that. And then there are two very different worlds out there. There's the corporate world and the charity world. And they operate in quite different ways. But what we try and do is sit somewhere in between those and understanding both of them and trying to bridge it. So we try and get people, beneficiaries of charities, and with our relationships then with the corporate sector, getting them genuinely sustainable work.
I see. That is a very good model. How long have you guys experienced with this model for it?
Well, this, like I said, learning as we go. So with a challenge this large, you aren't going to get the answer the first go. But you try this way, you try that way, and you keep on trying. And the same with the other members of Global Impact Portfolio. They're all doing the same. And it's trial and error, of course. So we have a long list of things we know don't work, which we've learned the hard way. But that's necessary, otherwise we wouldn't know. But we're getting closer to this now. So the good thing with business process outsourcing work is it's very clearly measurable, and it's low risk as well, because if they can do some work successfully, they benefit, we benefit. If they can't, no one loses either, because it's on a kind of a freelance basis. So, and then because the BPO work is very precise, the way you're working with an artificial intelligence, you can exactly measure someone's performance down to the keystroke, if you're paying them per document processed. So then we can start seeing what interventions do work. So for example, the upcoming virtual office party, I could see on my database, we've got about 500 people on the database. I could see which ones have joined the party, and then I could watch, does their performance change before and after, for example? Or I could, offer an online training course and maybe 20 people take it, and I'll see, does their performance change after that? If it doesn't, at least I know. If it does, I'd do more of it. So, I'm always just trying to think of ways. I mean, one of the other ones was on one very difficult project recently, a lot of people were failing the test to get into the project. And I was like, I was asking them, it seemed to be a confidence issue. So I said, look, okay, what about one of the people who passed the test, if they just go online for a couple of hours and just as they're working on the project normally, just video record themselves and talk to themselves, explain what they're doing, and then anyone else can log on to that and just watch them work for a couple of hours and know that another person with a disability has worked out how to do it, and just watch the other person working and then give it another try themselves. So, you're always just trying to think of new ways to crack this, and it's a very novel HR challenge, but it's really kind of, these days it's data driven. So I can have ideas, I can have a guess of what I think will work, but at the end of the day now, we have the ability to data drive it. So you can see across a bigger and bigger database all the time as we expand what has worked, and then do more of it.
What is one of the biggest rewards in building Enablecode for you?
I mean, the main thing is to see the beneficiaries, to see people's lives changed because of it. So it's often individual stories where you see someone who's never been able to work before going straight into an AI project and getting their first ever pay. and they're often, you see them on Facebook or something like that, and how delighted they are, and telling their family, and I can tell them, they actually really earned that money. That client in America will now be able to do something more easily because of that work. That wasn't charity. That was, they had a purpose, that they did something genuinely that was of value to other people. So yes, of course, the money is very valuable to them, but it's also the purpose that they get. So that's the objective, the social objective, and the reward as well, seeing that work.
I see. I see that you experiment a lot of different HR methods into this, and certainly you can see a bigger impact, especially working with people with disabilities. There are many challenges, especially in their mental state, that you can experience, like you said, like the mirroring, seeing someone else doing the work, and then they get more confidence that they can do the same thing. That's a lot of great strategy that you're doing right now. Congratulations on that. Yes, and you are, so I want to ask more about HRs in general, as you also the chairman and founder of Vietnam HR Associations and Vietnam Business Forum HR Group. So could you share more with me about the current stage of HR in Vietnam?
Yeah, so having been here a long time in Vietnam and being, let's say, non-Vietnamese, obviously as an outsider looking in at the Vietnamese culture, there's a better story here than most Vietnamese suspect. So I'm also a judge of the Vietnam HR Awards. So I see the very best of the big multinational companies, or the best Vietnamese companies, how they manage staff in Vietnam. And there are a number of household name companies who have the best performing branches in the world here in Vietnam. So the performance of the best Vietnamese is literally the best in the world.
Wow.
And so literally you've got these big multinational companies flying in teams from America, from Europe, from Japan, trying to find out how the best performance in the world is coming out of Vietnam. And I told the government this. I said, look, okay, Vietnam actually has this potential. This could be one of the most successful countries in the world based on how good the Vietnamese people are. And a lot of people don't believe me on this one, but I'm seeing this. I saw this from the beginning, 20-something years ago. And it is quite possible. And to understand that, you've got to look at what the Vietnamese character and culture is and how that impacts into a business setting. So I see there's 3 different levels of the Vietnamese character. So the foundation of the Vietnamese character is East Asian. So a Vietnamese person will have more in common in terms of work ethic and things like that with someone from Korea or Japan than they would with someone from, let's say, Thailand or Myanmar. And so that gives the Vietnamese this great work ethic, drive, discipline, intelligence. There's a number of things that come with that.
Yes.
But if you speak to a lot of people from the other East Asian countries, the first thing they do is they're all very stressed out. They're always complaining about each other. But what Vietnam was very fortunate, it got a lot of Southeast Asian influences as well, and got the best bits of that. So the Southeast Asian part of the Vietnamese character is a great kind of friendliness and teamwork. So what you've got then is these massively high-performing, driven individuals who can work together. And working in Vietnam, Europeans, we're surprised as well, about how friendly and nice everything is in an office environment here in Vietnam.
Yes.
So you've got that. And then as the 3rd level, right at the top, you've got this unique Vietnamese characters of a lot of this kind of cheeky, resilient, innovative, creative, problem solving. So this is a very unique Vietnamese thing. That's actually a very modern skill that's needed. So very often, you know, the Vietnamese will just find a solution to something. So you combine all those three together and you've got the best combination in the world. So if you look at, let's say, the pandemic at the moment, why did Vietnam have a better outcome than almost anyone else in the world? It was that combination of the three things. So the people were all very dedicated to being in a communal society, collectivist society, to care for each other. Plus then they did that in a very nice way. Plus they were adaptive. So the Vietnamese economy could sidestep and adjust very quickly. If the job moved online, they could do it way quicker than anyone else because they're used to being flexible and adaptive. So Vietnam has this enormous potential. If we can get the whole country up to that level, this really will be one of the richest countries in the world. And I do believe that is the future. It's a much better story. Often the Vietnamese do themselves down. And yes, this country has had a challenging history and it had recent poverty. But the people themselves are very capable as a culture and individually. So yes, I mean, Vietnam has had the highest level of wealth creation in the world for the last 20 years, will do for the next 20 years, and they deserve it. So when I'm advising the Vietnam government on their human resource policies, the first thing I have to say to them is congratulations. You know, you don't be the best performer in the world by accident. So yes, there's an unexpectedly good story there about Vietnam.
Then for an employer, then what is the best way to manage such cultural workforce?
It's certainly to put things in the local perspective. Because whenever, especially as a foreign investor, so the Vietnam Business Forum is largely representing foreign investors. And it's obviously, this applies anywhere, but it's understanding the host culture. So, you know, kind of understanding what makes the Vietnamese tick, you know, and appreciate what's good there, but also adjust your management style to those different cultural characteristics. So, for example, in England, when I was managing in HR very large teams of English people, you give them a policy, and the first thing they do is say why. You give a Vietnamese person a policy, and they appreciate it and say, "Oh, can I have another one, please?" So an English person would hesitate to set rules, whereas that's actually culturally accepted here. So it's understanding, you know, what Vietnamese like, and obviously the simplest advice to a foreigner is, you know, just talk to your Vietnamese staff about what they want, what they appreciate, and what works. Because, you know, in Vietnam, a lot does work. And as a foreigner, you've got to question, why does it work? It doesn't work in the same way it does in England. Well, yeah, of course. But understand why it works and use that. So it's really adapting to these natural strengths of Vietnam. And we also see this now, you know, where Vietnam had been a place for low cost in the past. But now you've got some of the best technology research in the world, especially in artificial intelligence, being done here in Vietnam, not for cost, but because it's simply better. I know companies that have closed research centers in Europe and America or Japan and moved them here to Vietnam simply because the Vietnamese could produce better results.
That's great. Then what are the common mistakes that foreign companies should avoid when managing Vietnamese workforce?
Yeah, I mean, the first mistake is this cultural one. And that's the main one, really. So if you try and just take the playbook, the standard way you do things in other countries, and just blindly impose it on a country workforce, it's never really going to work. So if you look at the most successful multinational companies in Vietnam, they've adjusted. They've worked out, okay, this is what we do well, and this is what would work well in Vietnam. So they worked out, similar challenges to what I have, is how do you explain it in a way that is culturally understandable.
Mm.
So when I'm trying to I know the answer to something, but how can I get a person with disability in Vietnam to understand what I understand? So I've got to experiment with loads of different ways, or just otherwise ask some Vietnamese friends, like, okay, how does this sound to you? How would you explain it? You know, just also listen and adjust. And that's the thing with working with you know, transformation and technology these days. It's all about adaptability and adjusting. So when you're working with people across cultures, that's adjusting. When you're working with technology transformation, that's adjusting. And when you put both those together, it's an awful lot of adjusting. So it's, you know, keep an open mind.
Yes, absolutely. Especially during this time where a lot of things has been changing for the past few months, then yes. Any business should be open mind and should ready to adapt to a new environment. Then what would your advice for how HR can best respond to like the pandemic?
Yeah, so well, for the pandemic, it's suddenly accelerated a lot of changes that were happening anyway. So, you know, we all switched to things like Zoom in the pandemic, and the technology wasn't the restraining factor. The technology worked fine, it was there, and it was capable, and it could have done it years ago.
Yes.
But it was our behavior, you know, we were just sticking to routines like coming to an office just because, well, that's the way it was. So this has suddenly been accelerated forward. So the companies that will survive this and even do well out of this are the ones that understand this isn't just a temporary pause and back to normal. This is a fundamental shift and a very strong reminder to everyone to do that digital transformation and embrace these, you know, 21st century skills that they should have done in the first place, but it's now just accelerated in a much more risky environment. And HR shouldn't just be, I mean, HR when it's done badly is just a administration function. And administration is best done by computers. If it's routine and just, you know, paper processing, let the computer do that. And, you know, I've been in HR for many years, and a lot of my old job when I was in Europe used to be stuff that's now done by a computer. And it's fine, that was the boring stuff, the computer's welcome to it. But a lot of HR people who've only known that, they get very defensive. They say, oh, the computer's taking away all my work. You know, if I can't stamp a stack of paper, what am I going to do? And my advice always to HR people is I say to them, why did you go into HR in the first place? And they say, oh, because I'm a people person. I say, well, that's great. That's the right answer. So why does your job look like an accountant at the moment? You're not that person. It's all process and numbers and, you know, I'm saying this is your chance to be the person you always wanted to be, to have the job you always wanted. Don't, you know, try and fight to keep hold of the stuff that the computer can do but much better than you. Actually add value. So, you know, when the companies now have the challenge of the questions like how do you motivate a remote workforce? How do you adjust jobs to the pandemic? HR should be the one knocking on the CEO's door saying, look, I've got some ideas and answers, rather than kind of sitting there in a corner waiting to be fired. So there are some HR departments here. I mean, when I do the Vietnam HR Awards, there are some outstanding HR talent here in Vietnam. But also, on the flip side of it, you do see a lot of people who are just still stuck in the very old administration mindset.
Yes.
And I would encourage them, you know, don't be threatened by change. Modern HR is actually quite good fun. It's quite interesting. You know, why not do something interesting? You know, it isn't just a paycheck. It's actually, you know, helping other people, doing these human things. So HR can be, in modern context, a lot more than it often is. And if someone unfortunately has got into a rut of just doing paperwork, it's difficult to get them out of it. And if a company's looking to cut costs and they say, okay, who's critical in a workforce? HR is often the first to get the chop if they're just administration, because they're like, okay, you know, just give that to the ERP system, and, you know, it's no longer needed.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with you because HR, if there are a lot of technology, we're living in a world where there's a lot of technologies are replacing and helping and doing better jobs, but there's one thing that technology couldn't do better than us is the human part. So HR would be a very vital role in helping the companies to build the culture that is not just technology, or it's just not just work.
Yeah, so it's teaching people, it's teaching humans to be humans.
Mm-hmm.
So the education system, scores very good results in Vietnam. It's got a very strong education system in terms of numeracy and things like that. But what is now required in now the Vietnamese economy is moving up to the next level, and with technology, is these human skills. So the education system, and it's not just Vietnam, this is all countries are facing this challenge. The education system teaches people to be computers. But now computers are far better at being computers than we'll ever be. If you try and race your laptop, who can calculate something fastest? Of course, the laptop will win. Or who can remember the most things? Whereas the school system is still teaching people to remember things and calculate things. Yeah. So yes. What is now needed is someone who has, the empathy, for example. So they understand what the computer can do, know to ask the right question and understand the answer. It's not doing the calculation. So these are human skills. And these are also childhood development skills. So people who've learned them can't remember learning them, so they have a great deal of difficulty teaching them. And people who haven't learned them and have got to adulthood without understanding it, it's incredibly difficult psychologically to then develop these human skills. And all the research work that's been done in Washington by the World Bank or New York by the United Nations, the upshot of all of it is, yes, the answer is very difficult and they don't know exactly what it is. So again, it's about experimenting. Yes. How can you explain to people how to be human?
I think that's the challenging part and a very exciting phase we're heading to. And
yes. Yeah, I mean, yes. the world is headed in this direction, and it's very uncharted territory, and the pandemic's made it even more so. But the thing is, to be a little bit brave, try and get ahead of the issue, and try and develop these human skills in people. And there's enough work. These aren't soft skills, these are survival skills. You have them, you can do a job and you can earn some money. You don't have to be irrelevant. And in making that something that's actionable for companies and individuals, that's HR. So HR could actually jump to the forefront of being useful in this whole thing. And some of them do. Unfortunately, a lot still haven't quite worked it out yet.
Yes, and I think that is some food for thought for the audience out there, so we can think about the challenge ahead for HR or as for our society and as a whole. And I think that's a great recap for our episodes. Thank you for joining us today. And for the audience, if they want to reach out to you or they could find more of your work, where can they find you?
Just on our website, enablecode.vn. Just have a look for us there and you'll see a bit more examples. And also we're often, publishing ideas down social media channels and so on.
Where can they find your publishing?
I'm putting on LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that. And just sharing ideas as I have them, because the idea with social enterprise is, you don't keep the idea to yourself. You're not competing in the way an oil company does. If you can help, then you share the information that's going to help people.
Yes, absolutely. So for the audience, again, Enablecode is ENABLECODE.VN. Find more about their work on the website, as well as Colin Blackwell, personal publishing on LinkedIn, Facebook, or somewhere else?
Those are the main two I use.
Oh, I see. All right. Yes. So remember, Colin Blackwell and Enablecode, thank you for joining with me today for the podcast. I hope you have a wonderful time as I do. And thank you for the audience for tuning in for this episode. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.